Welcome to another episode of The Modern Hotelier. This episode, we are excited to bring you our conversation with Ilir Sela, the CEO and founder of Slice. David, what were some of your favorite takeaways from this episode?
I think in general, it's just great, that there's somebody there and, someone whose family immigrated to this country still believing in the American dream, was a great guy, was a great guest, and unfortunately now I'm starving for a slice of pizza.
I agree. He literally is living the American dream. It's absolutely incredible. And hearing his story and kind of his route, how he got there from computer software to now being the owner and CEO of Slice. I've been a big fan of his since around the COVID time when I discovered the company, but it was such a cool backstory. And then hearing how he's growing Slice to, a pretty big company now. So very cool episode. We hope you enjoy the conversation and let us know what you think.
Enjoy it. Welcome to The Modern Hotelier, hospitality's most engaged podcast. I'm David Malilly.
I'm Steve Karen.
And I'm John Boomhofer.
Steve, who do we have on the program today?
Yeah, David. Today we have on Ilir Sela. Ilir is the founder and CEO of Slice. Slice is a business platform empowering over 20,000 pizza shops, generating nearly $2 billion in sales. Slice's mission is to bridge the digital divide for small pizzeria owners, enabling them to thrive in an increasingly digital marketplace. Welcome to the show, Ilir.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for today.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go through a couple of different sections. We're going to do a lightning round real quick. We're going to get to know your background, your career. Now we're going to jump into some industry topics. Sound good?
Let's do it. Sounds good.
All right. What was your first job?
My first job was a deli clerk when I was 13.
Wow. What's something that you wish you were better at?
I wish I was better at basketball.
What's a luxury you can't live without?
Oh, that is all relative because so many things, I grew up my first 10 years in Macedonia in a small, tiny town. Most of the things I live with today feel like luxuries. Luxury, time.
It's a good one. All right. So if you had a superpower, what would you want it to be?
These are good. The ability to better understand how my words and actions impact others.
Good answer. What's a place you've never been to, but you'd most like to go to?
The Cayman Islands.
So if you had your own late night talk show, who would your first guest be?
My dad.
All right. As the final one, if you had a time machine, which way are you going, into the future or into the past? And what year would you go to?
That's a tough one because I'm an optimist. I'm excited about the future. But my dad always says, hey, which is, I think, a common saying, if only I could be, 20 again, but knowing what I know now. And so for me, that would be the year 2000.
Wow.
Beautiful. Well, that was great. Now we're going to learn about your background a little bit, maybe what makes you tick a little bit. So like you said earlier, you were born in Macedonia and then you moved to Staten Island when you were 10 years old. How did growing up in Macedonia and then moving to Staten Island really shape who you are today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I grew up in a tiny town called Dibur. Back then it was the Yugoslavia. Today it's Macedonia. My family's Albanian by background and grew up in this really small town. There's no traffic lights, probably 7,000 people. And, family was a big part of growing up but not, it's a place with not a lot of opportunity, I would say, which was pretty clear. And so moving to New York when I was 10, I remember flying into JFK Airport. I didn't know it was JFK Airport. I just knew it was New York. And so, as a 10-year-old, you're looking out the window and you're looking at all of the lights of New York. It is a stark contrast relative to where I grew up. And, going back to my dad, which was one of the things that was very consistently instilled was really all about the opportunity that exists in America, specifically in New York, compared to where we were. And so I think that has really shaped a lot of my life and especially my professional journey.
So you went to City University of New York, College of Staten Island, and you studied computer science. What kind of led you to that university and what led you to computer science?
Yeah, I will tell you, school, for whatever reason, once we moved to New York, school was just felt easy. Some of the math lessons we learned in fifth grade in Macedonia, or then Yugoslavia, I didn't come across again here until high school, which
Wow.
was fascinating. And so I think the difficulty level was very different. And for that reason, probably I was always just really good at school. I didn't really study that much, but things were just felt easy. And so I was pretty successful in high school. I was one of the top 5 students in our class, and I had all these scholarships. But as a family, we all believed in staying close to each other. And so the closest place to our home was the College of Staten Island, and that's how we ended up there. So it was myself, my twin brother, and for a year it was my older brother as well.
You've mentioned your father a couple times already on the podcast. He is obviously a pretty big inspiration for you. What really, I guess, makes you inspired about your father, and kind of how did he play a role into Slice?
Yeah, it's my dad, my grandfather. Again, we all grew up very close together for a period of our life. We all lived together. At one point, we lived with my uncle as well, who's uh, has been in many ways a father figure as well. And I think the thing that was just always spoken about or just communicated was the importance of hard work. There's a story I tell, which is when my grandfather got a little bit older, and he was not really that physically that capable anymore. He asked my brother and I to do some like manual labor work in the backyard. I think it was to like clean up leaves or rocks or something like that. And we were pretty annoyed by it, and so he stopped us for a second and he said, "Hey, I don't know if you guys know how lucky you are that you get to work really hard." And so whether it was my grandfather or my dad, who for a long period of time held 2 jobs in order to support his family, but also even through that just continued to really push us to think about entrepreneurship. He would say very often that the rules of this country, of America, are designed, the system is designed to reward business ownership and entrepreneurship. And so I think it was the combination of like hard work and entrepreneurship that made a really big impact, not only for myself, but my brothers as well.
Love that.
Yeah,
Love that.
that's great. All right, so I have to apologize for one part of this next question. So I have to ask you if you're a bigger fan of the New York Giants. Thank you for Barkley, because I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan, or Albania's football team. So you're a bigger fan of the Giants or Albania's football team?
I'm a bigger fan of the New York Giants.
Okay. All right.
All
That's
right.
good to know.
There we go. Well, good luck this season. Good luck.
Thank you.
That's
We need
great.
it.
Now we're going to learn a little bit more about your career, how you got to be the CEO and founder of Slice. So after college, you started Nerdforce. Was this your first startup? And what lessons did you learn from Nerdforce that help you in Slice today?
Yeah, Nerdforce was my first startup. So, while in school and just coming out of school, it was around the same time as the emergence of broadband internet and generally just personal computing and all that good stuff. And with that came a real need for computer repair, networking, specifically focused on small businesses and some, at-home office sort of operators. And a lot of my friends were doing a similar job as was I. In our spare time, we were fixing computers and setting up wireless networks and things like that. And so I realized that we were all kind of doing the same thing and we're all facing similar challenges. So I thought that we could benefit if we just sort of united into one brand, one entity, that we can probably hire some shared resources. One of our biggest pain points was the fact that while we were fixing computers, we were getting phone calls for new appointments, and it was just very disruptive. And so something as simple as that, which was, hey, what if we hired a handful of people to answer the phone, if we all had a shared number, and then based on our location, each person gets the appointments scheduled. So we all kind of got these Blackberries at that time, which allowed us to like get emails with appointments And that was really the start of the first business, which was how do we enable small businesses with an IT department because they didn't have the resources to have a full-time employee. And we scaled pretty quickly, but that was the business model. And it was a collection of independent contractors choosing to operate under a consistent brand and sharing resources.
That's awesome. Those Blackberries were game changers back in the
Oh
day. They
man,
had email on them and the full keyboard.
it
I
was
loved them.
awesome, and we all had to we had to have an AT&T line because
Yep.
AT&T was the only carrier that allowed you to be online and on the phone at the same time.
Yep.
Little nuances that not a lot of people may know about. And yeah, but we ended up scaling pretty quickly and started to get some phone calls from people who wanted to own a Nerdforce franchise, which I had no idea what that even meant. I was by then I was maybe 24. I had no idea what a franchise was, but if we're getting so much demand for people who want to own a Nerdforce franchise, I decided to just immerse myself in that, studying the business model, but also pretty quickly converting the business from a tech support company to a franchise company that enables and supports tech support companies.
So next, it looks like your new life in pizza started. So you started MyPizza Technologies. What led you to start that company?
Yeah, so it was really the evolution from Nerdforce to MyPizza. Nerdforce, we ended up franchising in 2005, and over the next 3 years, we scaled to 124 franchisees. And that was my MBA in franchising. I mean, I attended franchise expos and learned everything about franchise disclosure documents, you name it, the whole thing. And franchising is probably one of the, if not the largest and most successful business innovations of our lifetime. It really creates opportunity for so many people. But I learned it has one potentially fatal flaw, which is it takes away the creative freedom from the operator. And so one of the challenges we had was that all of our franchisees had to be uniform. But the reality is they all wanted to operate in the gray and they wanted to adjust to the local needs of their geographies and customer base and so on and so forth. And so I ended up selling Nerdforce in 2008, sold it to a public company. It was a good outcome, life changing at that time. But immediately it started to really better form an opinion about what is the right business model to enable other small businesses. And I grew up in the pizza industry, and a lot of pizzeria owners were asking me for help with technology. And it was sort of combining those lessons from the franchise model with the technology background and but also the pizza community that I grew up around. And that's really what led to MyPizza. And the idea was to build a business model that I've called a reverse franchise, which is how do you create the franchise stack, the components, the aspects, all the positive things about the franchise model, while championing the authenticity and creativity of local brands and local operators. And so that's how MyPizza was born.
It's very cool. Very cool. And then in 2016, you rebranded to Slice. What was the reason for the rebrand? And did your mentality change at all with the rebrand?
Yeah, so for the first 6 years of the business, I bootstrapped. So we bootstrapped under mypizza.com. And to be honest, like the idea was to try to get pizza.com, but it was too expensive. The price was right around $5 million. I didn't have the money. And so I decided to acquire mypizza.com. And, in 2009 or so, mobile was still not a big thing. And so web was so important. And so we scaled as mypizza.com, leading with our first product, which was online ordering and websites and sort of online presence for pizza shops. That was the most important product because I learned pretty quickly that by moving customer behavior from phone to digital, it enabled pizza shops to be more successful. Their revenue went up, their efficiency went up. And so we just did that for about 6 years. Around 2015, we had scaled to 44 million in GOV in total sales on the platform, with about 4 million in revenue and maybe 3 million of that was profit per year. It was super efficient, like bootstrap company. And so Through that experience, I decided to reach out to one of the founders of Seamless, which had eventually became Grubhub. They had sold the company. And the idea was to surround myself with people who can help me expand my network and help us really scale the business. And so that led to the second phase of the company, which was more or less winding down mypizza.com, but taking all of the assets and relaunching in 2016. And part of that relaunch was also me hiring leaders that were able to help me scale. One of those leaders was a gentleman named Nick Karat. Today he's actually the CMO at StockX. Nick joined, and one of the first things he asked me is, hey, let's really refresh this brand. Are you open to exploring all options? And for me, I try to be as objective as possible. And so my feedback to him was, look, let's explore whatever is best for the business. And one of the options that came forward was the name brand Slice. I got a lot of feedback from all these experts basically that said, hey, that's such a generic name. It's very likely it's not ownable. You won't be able to really own it. The only way you'll really own it is if you're like crazy successful. And I thought that was like, I mean, yeah, why else would we be doing it? And so I just decided to make the call and go after it. And so that's how Slice was born.
He almost like challenged you to be ultra successful, to make it a brand, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not going to go for it, like,
Right.
what are we doing, right? And so it was a risk for sure because there was other brands named Slice. There's like a soda company named Slice, and there's all these kinds of obviously generic terms. But I'm really happy it worked out.
So, obviously a lot of businesses, companies struggled during COVID. How did COVID affect Slice?
Yeah, COVID was a wild time. This goes back to, I think, just being surrounded by great experienced leaders, both on the management team and the board. In the first few days of stay-at-home orders, as we can all remember, everything shut down because we were under the impression that for 2 weeks we'll just sort of bite the bullet, stay in for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks things will go back to normal. And one of our investors at the time, GGV Capital, which today is known as Notable Capital, at the time they had 3 partners in Asia and 3 partners in the US. And in Asia, especially in China, they were kind of ahead of us on the calendar. And they knew very quickly, or at least they understood from there, that it would actually just not be a 2 week thing. And then after the first couple of weeks, what they saw in companies similar to Slice in Asia was this incredible acceleration of demand. And so instead of playing defense, what we chose to do was pretty quickly, within a matter of days, we raised $43 million and decided to play offense. And so our business almost overnight, after the first few days of just everything going to zero, and while everything's zero, we're raising $43 million in anticipation of a big spike. And within, I would say, 7 days, things just started to really accelerate. And it was a wild year where we are at the same time trying to help our team members move to remote positions, especially customer service and restaurant support, while at the same time we're trying to be available for the shop owners who are risking their life and their families and their staff, risking their life to stay open and support their community, support their families. And then be able to scale with the demand on the consumer side that just spiked like I've never seen before. And so I think it was a moment in time that helped the company grow up really quickly in a good way. And so fortunate to have gone through that experience. It was unlike anything I've ever been through. I learned a lot. I don't want to go through it again, but
Right.
I'm grateful that we came out of it as a much better company.
That's actually where I first heard about Slice, to be honest with you. I used to follow Dave Portnoy's pizza reviews religiously.
Yep.
And I think you guys were sponsors, and he promoted you guys a lot by helping out these local pizza shops, still stay in business during COVID. And that's the first time I ever heard about Slice.
Yeah, we did a lot of cool things with Dave. He's a champion of small business, and we align on those principles. And really grateful for him, and just the ability for him to be able to talk about Slice and our common shared values was a cool time. Yeah.
Well, that was great to get to know your background a little bit more. So now we're going to get into some industry thoughts. So, like you mentioned earlier, you bootstrapped $40 million. Why did you choose to bootstrap? And what were some of the advantages you saw come out of that?
Yeah, I didn't think that there were other options. I honestly didn't know about the VC world much. I grew up around small businesses. I grew up with the idea that you can create a product for $1, and then you can sell it for two, and then you just do that as many times as possible. Like that's the business sort of mentality I grew up with. And so it wasn't until I started to meet more folks and expanded my network that I was introduced to investors and venture capitalists. And even then, it wasn't so much about us needing the money as much as I wanted to just expand our ability to grow our network and experience and invite awesome people on to Slice. But I think the benefits of bootstrapping, which I think are still sort of embedded in our DNA today, is that resource constraints breed so much creativity. Like it forces you to become a much stronger problem solver. It's really easy to throw money at a problem, but it's really challenging and likely more rewarding if you find creative solutions. And so that's one I would say. The other is, just operating with discipline. I'm pretty proud of the fact that Slice has been profitable the last 3 years in a row. But that choice when we decided to just be profitable again wasn't a difficult one. It was like pretty clear what we had to do. And so, yeah, bootstrapping is, if I were to launch another company in the future, I would bootstrap it for sure, at least in the beginning. It's definitely a much lonelier journey, but it's an experience that I think forces entrepreneurs to really figure out problems sooner and also become really focused. That's the other thing bootstrapping does, it forces focus. You have no resources to do anything more than one thing really, really well. And that was MyPizza. It was basically turnkey, sort of, almost templated websites for pizza shops with an online ordering component. And we just plugged those into as many shops as possible over 5 years.
All right. Well, you keep hitting the number 40 because in 2021 you raised a Series D of 40 million at Slice. What was the most, or what has been the most challenging part of scaling after raising a round like that?
Yeah, the $40 million round, fortunate to have the opportunity to work with O1 advisors, Adam Bain, Dick Costello, just awesome operators and entrepreneurs. And the goal was to bring them on board. And with that, our existing investors also wanted to participate. And we ended up just pretty quickly putting together a 40 million round, which I think we still have on our balance sheet. But whether you raise money or not, I think as the company scales, there are absolutely lessons and adjustments that leaders should be making, especially founders and CEOs should be making, which is your role is almost reinvented every 6 to 12 months. And you go from a company that is relatively small and scrappy to having to focus more on building an engine and making sure that you're really paying attention to the components of that engine and empowering people to execute. And so I think that was one of the biggest lessons for me. And it wasn't an easy transition, but I think once you kind of establish that trust, and once again, it goes back to having the right leaders and experienced people on the management team, then things can become pretty exciting pretty quickly.
One thing we talk about on this podcast a lot is culture, mostly in hospitality. And I love following you on LinkedIn because you talk about the culture of your company a lot. One thing I saw was that you actually created an English course for your team in Macedonia. What advice do you have for companies or folks out there that are looking to build a positive and successful culture?
Yeah, I would say it all first off, it all starts with being really disciplined with inviting people to your company to be members of your team that align with some of the common values that are very important to not only me as a founder, but our management team and our leadership team. And for us, it everything starts with our mission. And so I think one thing I'm really proud about with Slice is whenever I meet anyone who's heard of our company, they can almost repeat our mission, in verbatim. And so I think culture starts with a common belief. Everyone's there and everyone's at Slice for the purpose of empowering small business, in our case, small business pizza shops. I would say that's really important. And it's really easy for CEOs and founders or any leader to make sacrifices there, especially when you meet really talented people. You want to find a way to bring them onto your company. And sometimes you will overlook some of these components, some of these gaps in common values. And I think that's where culture starts to deteriorate. And so the first lesson or the first sort of piece of advice I would give is have a really high bar, have very clear values that are important, and then hold the bar really high on those values and make sure that whoever joins is very much aligned with you on those. I'd say the second part that's more broad, that's kind of simple to be honest, is culture is what companies tolerate. And so it really is as simple as that. And I'm not suggesting, when I say tolerate, I'm not suggesting if something happens, like you come down with like, an iron fist, but being incredibly clear about what success is and making sure that whenever somebody isn't pulling their own weight or whenever something is, in our case, if you tolerate missed timelines consistently, then you have no timelines. That's a very, I think, more of a pragmatic example. And so culture legit is what you tolerate. And then the last part is in order for teams to care about what you're trying to accomplish, you have to care about them. And this is not something that's like, I think we're all on this journey to figure out how to make sure that we can show and display care for people, but just doing the right thing is a big part of culture. Doing the right thing for the customer, doing the right thing for your team members. When faced with a decision tree, I like to believe that we're always trying to do the right thing, and that sometimes that may be counter to the near term goals of the business, but doing the right thing, I think, is the best long term approach you can have to culture.
Can you tell us, was there one failure that you had in business that you learned the most from, and how did you rebound from that? And what advice would you give to, people that are starting off, founders who are, go through that failure and have to kind of get back up?
I mean, there are a lot of failures. There's failures every single day. That is business actually. Those failures are lessons. I trying to think of specific examples. There are, with Slice as an example, there have been cases where, we thought deploying a 30 or $40 million marketing campaign would change things to a degree that never happened. And, I would say I just I guess I don't think of those things as failures though. I just think of those things as attempts, as tries. And not every attempt is going to deliver the outcome you expect or hope for. And so I think maybe a lot of people may consider those things failures, but I actually just consider that just another attempt. I would say the things that I try to be really thoughtful about are making sure that if I am taking a shot at something, like if we're making an attempt at something, that it's not going to be fatal. I mean, unless it's super early days, like day two of the company or something like that, like you don't want to make an attempt that is going to risk the entire company. And so how do you contain these attempts into in a way that allows you to obviously take a big shot, but also if you miss, it's not going to be fatal. But aside from that, like I'm not wired to think in mistakes. I'm just wired to think in like, what did we try? When we tried it, what did we learn? I think too many people give up on ideas because the first attempt failed. Oftentimes, it's very easy to then question the strategy, but 99% of the time, I find that it's actually an execution adjustment versus the wrong idea or the wrong strategy. Anyway, I'm sort of deviating now into something more broader, but I would say, yeah, that's sort of how I think about mistakes.
Yeah, I like it.
That's great. That's great. So I gotta ask this, and I'm sure you get this on most podcasts you go on, since you founded and CEO a pizza delivery digital marketplace for pizza spots. What is your favorite pizza spot in New York City?
You're gonna get me in trouble because there are 4,000 customers in the New York area, and they're all my favorite. But there's two answers when people ask me this question. The first answer is the one closest to you,
Good
because
answer.
that is what we call the home slice. That's what you grew up in, and so we actually try to take a position where we're not trying to build a platform that's more like Yelp or Google reviews and all these things, because every shop has something unique and special about them. Every shop has customers around their neighborhood who think and believe and are probably right that that shop is their favorite. And so who are we to tell them that, that shop isn't good enough and the next one's better? And so that would be my position. But my own personal favorite shop is the one close to me, which is called Pizzeria Giove. It's on Staten Island, New York. For anyone who's in the area or passes through, I would strongly recommend stopping by there. They have a great, great pie.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, this whole time, we have been asking you the questions. This is where we're going to turn the pizza table and let you ask us a question.
Okay. With recent guests, or to the extent you can remember, what was the answer you got from a guest that taught you the biggest lesson?
Ooh. Ooh. That is a great question. I gotta think about this one. David, I'll let you go first if you have an idea for this one.
Yeah,
I
I'm
gotta think
trying to.
about this one. So the guest that gave us like the best advice, or that we learned
Yeah.
the most from.
Yeah.
Oops.
The thing that stands out, you're like, wow, I learned something really interesting.
Well,
Okay.
I'll tell you. So for me, on again, because I'm old, so I'm going to go to the last one. So we interviewed a gentleman named Scott Eddy, and I didn't really think it was possible that you could not have a residence. So this gentleman travels around the world, only stays at hotels and cruise ships, and doesn't have an apartment or a house. He has a storage unit where he gets stuff. And you always kind of hear those stories, but you're always kind of like, yeah, bullshit. I'm sure you have a little apartment or a studio somewhere in Miami or New York or something. And he didn't. So I just didn't think that was really possible.
Wow.
And he proved me wrong. So
That is very interesting. I'd love to, yeah. I mean, I would love to pick his brain on some things.
yeah.
I'm going to go back to actually one of like the first episodes we ever recorded, and I'm going to stick in the hospitality space. I'm going to say Max Starkov. He is probably one of the smartest people that I think I've ever talked to in the hospitality industry, and like somebody who has just extensive knowledge on everything hospitality. He's also owned a few businesses himself, and just has this immense knowledge of hospitality. And he's also somebody I follow on LinkedIn and engage with quite often, just because he's just a vast knowledge of resource that I've been able to kind of follow along and continue my learning in hospitality, kind of learning through him and his advice and kind of advice on LinkedIn.
Well, and I'll chime in real quick. The best thing about Max is he's not afraid to say what he
Exactly.
thinks. That's why it's so raw that you're like, oh, I would have liked to said that, but I'm still, because he's retired, so he can kind of do whatever he wants. And you're like, I kind of wanted to type that too, but I still got clients and things people I got to work with. But
Yes,
I
he's
get it.
very real, which I appreciate his genuineness and his kind of opinion on a lot of things. And
I
most of the
love
time,
that.
I agree with him.
I love that.
That's great. So that was great. Thank you. We've been asking questions this whole time. So our producer, John, he's been sitting in listening at this episode. So we're going to bring him in for the final question, and then we're going to get you out of here.
So listening to you, it sounds like every business you've built has a major focus on enabling and empowering small businesses. One, I want to know why that's so important to you. And similar, you said the thing with culture, do the right thing is one of the biggest pieces to building culture. How have you seen focusing on small businesses and maybe doing that right thing really pay dividends in building Slice and some of your other endeavors?
Both great questions. The small business focus really probably comes from the fact that I grew up with small business owners. And to be quite honest, I never myself personally never, went on the journey to build a big company. The idea, MyPizza was a small business. My first company was a small business. I think every company starts as a small business, and it's kind of going back to the same principles of like what this country is sort of based on. It's that spirit of small business ownership and being able to have a purpose and have a business that can support family and perhaps give people an opportunity to live out the American dream. And so I think that is probably the underlying reason for that. I think the other part of it is where I believe the most amount of opportunity exists. Small businesses are constrained in so many ways, constrained in time, resources. And so, I think there's just always a ton of opportunity to provide real value, because I think the best companies provide more value than they extract. If you can provide, you know, $100 of value, then you've earned the right to probably make about $30 of that in return. That's my usual sort of framework. I think the other part of it is that it's just a notoriously difficult industry. And like I love hard problems. I think if I was operating a company that was relatively easy, I don't know that it would be so fun. So it's like the difficult challenges become really exciting and then ultimately rewarding. In terms of doing the right thing, I believe when it comes to customers and value and all that stuff, everything revolves around trust. So for example, if I called every pizza shop in the world today and I said, hey, I can generate you an extra $100,000 a year, and they trusted me 100%, every single one would say yes. It's kind of simple, right? If I said you will make 100 grand more and they trusted me, they would all say yes, but they don't say yes because they don't trust me. And so doing the right thing is really about establishing trust in the industry long term. It's making sure that you're always prioritizing the right outcome for the customer. And sometimes that is counter to what Slice can do. There's been examples. I'm very good friends with the CEO founder at Toast, which we don't compete with directly, but there are some competing aspects. And if there's a shop that can benefit from Toast over Slice, I will absolutely point them to that platform. And that is about, doing the right thing.
Well, that does it for another episode of The Modern Hotelier. This is where you get to let people tell people where they can find out more about Slice, more if they can reach out to you. So plug away.
Yeah, you just go to slice.com. That's the best place. We actually just finally acquired that domain name. And so I'm really excited for people to just go there. So if you go to slice.com, you'll find everything about Slice, but also I think you'll be able to reach me as well.
Well, that does it for another episode of The Modern Hotelier, Hospitality Most Engaged podcast. So whether you're watching or listening, we appreciate you. And I'm sure at this time you're about to get ready to go get a slice of pizza somewhere. And we will see you again soon. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you again.
Thank you. You made it to the end of The Modern Hotelier. Thanks for watching or listening. The Modern Hotelier is produced by Modern Hotelier Media. Make sure to like and subscribe if you're listening on YouTube, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you know a good guest, sponsor, or have media needs, feel free to reach out to us at hello@themodernhotelier.com. Thanks and have a great day.